Welcome back. Well, yes, indeed. Just going to focus on that budget and then break it down as much as possible. What does it mean for you out there? We've got Dr. Emmanuel Abolo here with us. He's an economist and a risk management professional. Good morning. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Well. Another year, another budget proposal. Yes, the National Assembly has signed off to this one. But is there anything significant for you about this budget?
Well, the only significant thing I can reference here has to do with the fact that they were able to pass the budget before going on recess. That is the only thing that is significant.
Is it that bad?
That's the only thing that is significant for me, because if we start from the perspective of the assumptions of the budget, you will see that it has always been the same. Since any time I can remember, you always see the oil price per barrel. Then you will see the production. Okay? So you find that we have been very consistent about that assumption. So even when the Nigerian Export Promotion Council had been talking about zero oil, and even as far back as 1986, when IBB was the head of state, he talked about the diversification of the economy away from oil, if you recollect.
Yeah.
That was a structural to adjust the structural adjustment program as far back as 1986. Well, if you pick all the budgets from 1986 to date, you will find that the first assumptions you will see is the price per barrel. That's what the budget is based on. Then, of course, you now see the oil production output. That's all.
My apologies, sir. Before we go into these specifics you're talking about, the general, theme of the budget says it's a budget of economic recovery and resilience. Does this assumption hold that promise for you?
It doesn't. It doesn't. Because for me, I always like to look at things you can control and things you cannot control. Okay? Those two key assumptions, that is the oil price and then the production output, you only have some level of control over the output. You don't have control over the price. So to that extent, we are still swimming in the realm of murky waters, over which you don't have control over those ones. So where are you going to be driving the growth from? If your revenue is challenged, where are you going to drive the growth from? And especially that you are in a recession period where you need to drive aggressively your aggregate demand, as we mentioned the last time. So the GDP growth of 3%, it's for me it's very, very unrealistic. I don't see how this is going to drive the economy. I don't see how this is going to take us away from the poverty capital of the world. I don't see how this is going to fight insecurity. And I don't see how this is also going to solve the problem of corruption, which are the three key pillars of the current administration.
What do you mean corruption? How was it supposed to have addressed it?
Yes. I was hoping to see how the budget was going to be implemented in terms of providing oversight, not overlook function.
But that's a responsibility of the National Assembly.
Of the National Assembly, yes, because all the arms are supposed to be working together. So it's not a question of executive versus the legislature, because the legislature has overall responsibility for oversight to supervise.
Yeah, but how much impact will their oversight function have on us tackling corruption?
You see, those who crafted the Constitution, they have some clarity in their mind, okay? Because when you have a budget, okay, and you see all of these figures, billions, trillions, and so on, if you keep those trillions and billions in the hands of angels, even without supervision, okay, you are leading them into temptation. That was why the framers of the Constitution said there must be checks and balances. And so where we should be focusing on, if we want the impact, if we want a positive impact, then what we must be looking at is to to what extent will the National Assembly be able to provide that important responsibility of oversight function over the budget implementation itself? That's very key. Otherwise, we'll just be looking at figures. And what you are going to see is that 2 years from now, we are going to be seeing proofs how certain money have been missing and so on. We should be preventing and not after the fact. We've been working on the basis of after the fact. 2 years from now, they are going to be seeing proofs and so on, 2 billion, 100 billion missing and so on. So for this budget, what I wanted to see is what is their focus on the monitoring mechanism, the performance mechanism. I wanted to see a budget on that, to see to it that there is proper oversight function over this budget.
That's on the part of the National Assembly.
Of the National Assembly.
But isn't that supposed to be a key role, this, measuring and all of that and supervising? Isn't that supposed to be a key role of the audit, process?
Yes, I agree with you. That is the independent, yes. Independent, because in a risk management architecture, I want us to be in a risk management mode. We keep on doing things the same way, and we expect to get different results. We will not.
If you could link it up with some of those budget assumptions, the breakdown there where we've seen the exchange rate, some of which you highlighted, the statutory transfer, the debt servicing, recurrent expenditure, and then you see the capex. So, but this time you see that, recurrent a little higher than that of the capex. So does this change anything for you?
It doesn't. We have always been, not only myself, virtually everyone who believes in this economy, that we should be focusing more on capital expenditure. And especially in a recessed environment, you need to boost more expenditure, capital expenditure, in order to promote aggregate consumption and demand in the economy. So to the extent that you still have recurrent expenditure over and above capital expenditure, is very, very worrisome. It means we are not listening to ourselves. How can, in a recessed environment, you're still increasing recurrent expenditure over capital expenditure? It's strange.
The expenditure seems like, it's just there. Unless you retrench people, unless you remove people from work, how are you going to cut down on your expenditure when you have very, very limited resources?
So that's a very good point you are making. We have been talking about political will since I was born. Political will. What is this political will? Okay? You're going to retrench people, or runs on your report is still there. But do we have the political will? Political will means that there is no policy you are going to implement that does not affect certain persons negatively and some other persons positively. That's what life is all about. Okay? But if those who are affected positively can compensate those who are affected negatively, that is where the political will is. So if I'm Mr. President, for instance, and I'm going to introduce a policy or an expenditure that is going to affect you negatively, but we know that that is in the overall interest of the public good, of the greater number of people. That's what you mean by political will. So if we are shying away from pruning down on spending and reduce the cost of governance, that is the main issue here. The cost of governance is too high. And that is where we need to take the knife and begin to cut down on it. It must happen at some point in time.
As a risk management expert,
yes,
if we are to cut down on expenditure, there are three arms of government. Where should we be looking at?
Well, there are three arms of government. But there is primus inter pares, that is, there's first among equals. And the first among equals is the executive. Okay? That is what you mean by the tone at the top in risk management, the body language. If the executive sends the signals, to the rest of the society today, I can tell you every other line, everybody will fall in line. So the tone at the top is very, and that's why I'm saying the executive. Okay? The executive, Mr. President, is the president of the whole country. It's not a president of one state or the other. So the tone at the top is very key, and that's the executive. Okay? Once they set that right tone, every other arm, the legislature, the judiciary, and every other elements within the system, they fall in line. So we need that tone at the top. That's what risk management says.
Okay. And if this tone at the top is essentially pointing to what? What would you expect the executive to do?
Well, what I expect the executive to do is, first of all, there has to be buy-in. Very, very important. Anything you are doing, your visioning process, your strategy, you need the buy-in of the people. So there has to be constructive engagement, communication, constructive engagement with the totality of people in this country. And there are several layers that you can lay in this consultation and communication. Okay? So once you communicate and you have a vision, the right vision that everybody can key into, you find that people will now follow the leader. So that tone has to be set. Remember when Mr. President said, when he came, he said, I belong to nobody, I belong to everybody. That was a very, very good tone. Okay? And we hope that he follows through that process. And initially, you saw everybody was keen in when they saw that tone. And I don't see any reason why he should continue with that tone.
Okay. Now, talking about the capital expenditure, this is what we have at, more than 4 trillion naira, expenditure more than 5 trillion, debt services more than 3 trillion naira. Given what we have now, and of course, definitely there are some assumptions in the details of the budget. Talking about capital expenditure, where should we be paying attention in order to jumpstart activities in the economy?
You see, where we should be focusing on are things that have multiplier effects in the economy. Multiplier effects. And what are these things that will multiply themselves within the system? Number one for me is energy, that is electricity. Very, very key. Once we get electricity right, you find that most people are even willing to engage as small and medium scale enterprise. They are willing to engage. Nobody is actually looking up to government to handle their affairs for them. But if you have electricity, working in this country, I can tell you it is going to propel, it's going to lift up the economy. So that is number one priority for me. That is energy, electricity. Very, very important. Now, the other one is education. Okay? You have our youths have been out of universities for almost, from school, for how many? Almost one year, and so on. That's a disaster for this country. So I expect a lot of money, because I look at the budget, I don't see how that is going to address, the challenges which ASU has posed. So to the extent that you have the youths unemployed, and you also have the youths outside, institutions, that's a big problem. So where is the production going to come from?
Does this allocation for that sector,
The education
sector, does it in any way give
This
you any
is
hope that
this is just a drop in the ocean. This is a drop. This can't address the challenge, the problem which ASU and higher institutions have maintained. This cannot take us anywhere.
The minister is quoted today to have said that universities will resume in January.
Well, that's just a pious, it's a statement of intent. We've been hearing of a resumption for the past 1 year. Nothing has happened. 545 billion, if you translate that to dollar, is peanut. It's peanut. We are talking of the current situation, the exchange rate of almost, if it's unofficial, that's about 500, 408. This will not add up to anything.
You prioritize power, but power comes number 6 on this list. And you said that education should come second. Education comes 4th on this list. How does that make you feel?
You see, this is the problem we have here. Power, 6 billion. It's not adding up. The Ministry of Health with COVID-19 vaccines and all of that, and the new form of COVID-19, coming up, I can't see how that has been planned for here.
Well, so the National Assembly also said about that one that perhaps there will be a supplementary budget to address COVID-19.
You see, supplementary, we're already talking about supplementary budget. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there is the type of rigor you want to see in the budgetary process is not there. The type of rigor you want to see. we have just passed the budget. We are already talking about supplementary budget. Even before the budget takes off, we are already talking. So where was the rigor? Where was the rigor?
You know, that they did approve extension of the implementation of the 2020 budget up until March to allow the capex, go on for a while. Does that suggest to you that perhaps they will keep an eye on that aspect and ensure that at least funds for infrastructure development is utilized properly?
When I heard that, I was taken aback.
Why?
What does that really mean? In accounting, you talk about carryover accounting. You want to carry over 2020 budget implementation to 2021. So I was trying to interrogate myself. What does that mean? Why couldn't, if you couldn't complete the implementation of a particular cycle, why was it not integrated into the 2021 budget? Why do you have to carry out, carry over implementation of a 2020 budget into 2021? I've been trying to interrogate myself.
So if they say the law allows them to, I think some say even up to 6 months to give spending if, certain things have not been done right. So are you saying that, look, if you're going to pass the budget, you pass it. But if you're not, let them spend up until that time. But insofar as it's been passed, you will prefer that let everything just go into the 2021 budget.
Well, the law allows them to make that kind of expenditure. So there was no need making news out of that. Anyway, if the law already allows you, our focus should be on the 2021 budget. The law allows you to keep on spending, outside the cycle of a particular budget. There was no point making news out of that. My point,
go ahead.
So my point really is that the type of rigor, but I need to commend, because the budgetary process is a very rigorous process. We cannot take that away from them. They're quite rigorous. It's a rigorous process. But the rigor is not in the type of direction that one would like to see. We are still in the mode of budgeting that is you find in stable economies. In stable economies.
Yeah, but part of the key consideration too, which is a recurring feature, I remember during the time of Speaker Bankole, where he said there were over 200, I think it was 200 billion unspent budgetary funds. So, but lately, what's been going on? Because how those sectoral allocations, appropriations are implemented is going to impact hugely on the formal sector out there, even the formal sector.
You see, it boils down to implementation. Okay? It boils down to implementation. It means we are not monitoring implementation. For you to pass a budget, and at the end of the day, you find that certain expenditures have not been made, it makes complete nonsense of the budgetary process. Now, if you look at the execution process for every budget, I think you have about 7 stages in any budget execution process, starting from the authorization when the budget is passed. You have about 6 stages in budget implementation. 6 stages. So the question then is, where is the problem coming from within those stages? Because we keep on having this problem. So we need to dig further, do a deep dive to see at what stage of the execution process that we have this gap, recurring from time to time. So that is why we are saying, let there be a technology, a performance-based technology that will drive this process. So oversight, which I keep on referencing, okay, that's based on the maker-checker principle. The maker is not the same person as the checker. The checker is the National Assembly. That is oversight. But in the absence of an integrated performance-based, technology-driven process, you keep on having this gap. So what I wanted to see in this budget is for the National Assembly to tell us how they plan to follow through with implementation of the budget. That's very key, so that we don't have these, lags and gaps.
Beyond the rhetoric. But, part of that concern was also, I think, the National Assembly and the MDAs, at some point, they were even at loggerheads. They said the MDAs were not remitting funds to the coffers, the TSA. And so when that happens, that will definitely impact on implementation and accountability.
There will always be loggerheads, okay, as long as you have humans existing There will be loggerheads.
But when it has to do with you not remitting funds as you ought to.
At what point did they find out that they were not remitting funds? It's always after the fact. It's always after the fact. If there had been a monitoring system and an independent audit that is carrying out its function, we won't be having this after the fact kind of thing. Okay? Because what normally happens is that you have not been remitting. At what point did you know that they have not been remitting money? 3 months, 6 months, 1 year.
We have had the Auditor General's report for as far back as 2014. And every year, we keep having the same thing that you're talking about. After the fact, yes. But then the question a number of people are asking is, hey, if we continue to have this, and the Auditor General's report remains just a report, no action whatsoever, it is supposed to go from the Auditor General's report to the National Assembly's Committee on Public Accounts and whatever action that needs to be taken. Up until now, that's all we have, just a report. And then it sits there, and then, analysis upon analysis, and then nothing happens. So, but then, it was just last night, we heard the, spokesperson of the House of Representatives saying that from their own findings, the MDAs have done fairly well, 7 over 10, he gave them, for the performance of the previous budgets. In your estimate, how would you, what's your take on that one, looking forward to the implementation of the 2021 budget?
Interestingly, the public sector is not exactly like the private sector. Okay, so since independence, you keep on having these problems. You see, the way the public sector functions is very different from the way the private sector functions. Okay, it's very, very tough. So you invite the MDAs to the National Assembly to come and defend things and so on. Okay, there's what we call the unseen hand in governance. There's the unseen hand. There are so many political interests which you cannot see. Sometimes you wonder, why are they behaving like this? Why are they doing like this? Okay, we have seen people who have been in the private sector who were criticizing government, and when they now come into the public sector domain, you begin to see a different thing. There are so many contending forces. Now, what should happen? That is why we talked about the tone at the top is very, very key. The tone at the top, everything revolves around the tone at the top. Once the tone is right, it sends signals. I have been in the public sector too. It sends the right signals. That's what we want to see. Once the tone at the top says that we are not going to tolerate non-performance, and then you have the key performance indicators for all the MDAs, and these things are monitored aggressively. Of course, you need to have the political will. I cannot emphasize enough the political will. If you enter into government, without the political will, you cannot cope with that environment. So the political will is very key.
Well, maybe you will tell us, what is this political will when we come back in just a moment. John, don't go away. Welcome back. Our concluding moments now. So you were talking about political will. Could you break it down for us? What does that really mean?
My interpretation of political will is very simple. One is that every decision that you want to make in life, especially in the corporate world, some people will be hurt in the process and some will benefit. And what the political will concept is saying is that if majority, so let's say 80% are going to benefit and 20% are going to be hurt, that's what change is all about. In a change environment, some people will be hurt and some people will benefit. So for the greater good. So in the implementation of a budget, of this budget, for instance, certain projects, certain decisions are going to hurt some people. Now, if those people who are going to be hurt are close to me, they are close to me, they have a lot of influence over me, okay? But I need to convince them that this decision is going to benefit the greater good. So whether you are from my church, or you are from my mosque, or you are from my tribe, it doesn't really matter. The political will is the will to implement what will benefit the greater good. Now, but what Carter Hicks now said, which is referred to as the compensation principle, because it is understood that under Pareto optimality, that a decision is Pareto optimal if majority of the people will benefit from that decision. That's Pareto optimality. But that concept was refined to say that it is not possible that you will implement a project and nobody will be hurt. So you now have to compensate. So the political will is that if you are my friend, you are from my local government area, I need to let you know that the decision I'm taking is for the benefit majority of Nigerians. But then we now have to work out an arrangement to compensate those, so including those who are my friends, to compensate them for the decision which I have taken. That is the political will.
But a lot will equal. Okay, go on. You want to?
So that's the situation you find in government now.
Because, I mean, a lot will equally depend on the system that exists in those places. Because if the systems are there, so no matter the amount of, influence or political will or lack of it that you exhibit, it may not be that significant if you have a very, very functional system. Is there any such thing?
Well, it's very tough in our own climate, in our own environment here. You see, because our objectives and preferences in this kind of environment in developing countries, Africa and so on. Yes. So you find that in advanced countries, the reason why they develop is because they have a vision for the country. Everybody keys into that vision. It is not a question of you are from my tribe or you are from my religion. No. That's why they are developing. But okay.
No, go ahead.
So the point I'm trying to make is that in implementing this budget, for instance, some of the decisions that are to be taken will hurt some people. It's just natural. It's just natural.
This budget is already a law. Well, as soon as it is appended to by the president, it becomes a law.
Yes.
Now, the assumption again is that for every such, appropriation, there are certain policies that would drive the implementation. Do we have good enough, strong enough, or potent enough policies that will help to expedite the expected returns or results of this bill?
Okay, that's what is missing. That's what is missing. That's why you need an integrated, we're in a digital age, okay? We're in a digital age. This budget can be cascaded. It can be broken down into the various components. But if you have a system in place where the monitoring mechanism are performance driven, okay? They are performance driven. You don't need extra policies again, okay? If you have the technology, you have all the business plan. Call them business planner for the ministries, for the departments, and for the agencies. They already have the budget. The budget is what goes into the final appropriation bill that you now find, okay? And there are key projects already built into each of those business. Call them business plans now. So if this is put in an integrated, solution, and they're available, put in an integrated solution, you see this thing, seamlessly. You see it seamlessly. So you don't have to physically visit an organization for you to carry out an oversight. No, it's technology that drives this. But in the absence of that, what they are going to find is that budget implementation at the end of the day will just be 50%, 40%.
Part of what they said, while they were considering this on the floor of the Senate, even the House, is that I think the expectations is that by first or second quarter of next year, implementing this budget will get us out of recession. Do you share the same view?
Well, it's an expectation, it's an expectation. But let's be very clear. For you to get out of this recession, you need a massive boost in terms of expenditure, massive boost. That is called, fiscal incentives. You need to spend a lot on capital projects, okay? And those capital projects should not be crowding out the private sector. There's what we call the crowding out effects of, fiscal spending. So I would say it will. Let me be positive here. It may take us out of, but the narrative is very clear, okay? If your house is under fire, you try to exit that house, okay? The strategy you are going to use to exit that burning house is not the same strategy you are going to use for recovery. So there's one thing to exit the recession. Yes, you can exit the recession for Q1. I don't have any problem with that. But when you exit this recession, what then happens? How are you going to recover?
That's where the private sector comes in. Pardon me, but do you see capital being freed up for the private sector in this budget?
You see, the revenue challenge is there. We don't have, a lot of leeway from the revenue side, except you are going to borrow massively. You're going to borrow massively. And
haven't we done that already? Haven't we been doing
yes,
that?
of course. The position we find ourselves now is that we are not sustainable. We have borrowed massively. So what needs to happen is not to is to look at the expenditures. I bring your knife and begin to cut down. That's where the political will comes.
Which is why I asked the other time, if we are to cut, what aspects would you recommend that will not put us in jeopardy?
Well, it's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult question. Is to cut the recurrent expenditure. You cut on recurrent expenditure. I cannot from here tell you exactly which of these items that should be cut.
Because you have to have a strategy and a plan.
Yes.
To cut that. It can't just happen in a year.
You can't just start. I can't tell you cut National Assembly. No. But to look at which of them are not of priority for us.
Okay. Let me ape a question that Chamberlain, asked earlier about the private sector. A very good number of those private sector practitioners are MSMEs. What hope does this budget have for them?
Well, this budget is a budget of recovery. Is to get out of recession. Okay,
Will it take us out of recession?
Yes, it will take us out of recession. That's why I said exiting. You may just exit, but not to the extent of talking about 3% GDP growth.
Which is the target?
So that's a tough one.
And that's about where we were before we got into recession.
Exactly.
So essentially, it's just to get out, not really to stay away.
Yes, it's just to get out. Let me also tell you, by next year, this 2021 here, politicking is going to start. Let's put that into account. Politicking is going to start. You already see people are positioning. Politicking is going to start.
Does it stop implementation of the budget?
It won't, but it's going to affect it. It's going to affect it because the contending interest is not going to be budget implementation, but positioning. Then secondly, I'm shocked that we haven't talked about insecurity, which is a major issue for any developmental, growth. Okay? Insecurity. If we do not tackle the issue of insecurity, and then next year you are going to have politicking, and then you now also have COVID-19 and the refined COVID-19 that we are beginning to see. So we are challenged as it were.
Well, in a way, we referenced. If you look at the key sectoral appropriations,
it's what we're going to focus on next for the next segment. So it's always a huge part.
I just wanted to let him see that if you look at those key sectoral appropriations, the top three are essentially talking about
these are just figures. They are figures.
Okay. Well, they have to be figures. Before you implement the figures. Once you implement if you don't have figures, how do you plan?
Figures. So that's why we said we are going to focus on the major plank of the government.
Okay.
Insecurity, corruption fight, and then which one is the third one?
Economic recovery.
Economy.
All right, then that's a place we have to let it go. Dr. Emmanuel Abolo is an economist and a risk management professional. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so we will be back and talk about, a large part of security will feature prominently in just a moment. Stay with us.